Hi, a very good evening, everyone. Now, as usual, I will do my stuff, okay? I need to do something over here. I need to invite those who are sitting at the back, please occupy the seats in front. Those that are sitting behind, can I have Mr. Jolani, right? Jolano. Mr. Jolano, Your Excellency, you can share our seats with us in front. Thanks to some of my council members. Now we are about to start this, but can we have the front seats being filled up, okay? And I believe Prof. Amy will not be with us today, so Stephen will take his place. Can I have my chairman? Chairman, you can take the front seat. Okay, let's settle down. We're about to start, okay? All right. Very good evening, everyone. My name is Roger Wang. And we are certainly very honored representing the Marketing Institute of Singapore to be the venue sponsor for today's event. Now, today's event is the last, I would say, the series of the 101 Lecture Series that is organized by the Middle East Institute from NUS and co-organized with the Singapore Universities of Social Science and the Singapore Universities of Social Science Doctorate Community. I hope I get it right. Anyway, my name is Roger. I represent the DBAC, which is the Doctorate of Business Admin community itself. And with me, we have our colleagues. But before I go on to introduce my colleagues, let me introduce a very important person today. He's none other than Mr. Bilahari Kausikan, which is the Honorary Fellows from the Middle East Institute from NUS. I will not introduce more of you. Later, my colleagues, Mr. Stephen or Dr. Stephen Ho, will be doing a bit more on that. But on my behalf, please allow me, on the behalf of the organizations of the Marketing Institute of Singapore, please allow me to do a bit of introduction on who we are. All right, you may wonder why you are here. So we are actually the venue sponsors for this event, and we're certainly very honored, like what I said, to have all of you. And of course, a special mention to Your Excellency, Mr. Giuliano, from the Embassy of Italy. Thank you, sir, for joining our events today. We are certainly very glad, to actually have you. Now, MIS, Marketing Institute of Singapore, we have been around for the past 51 years. We just celebrated our 50th year last year. All right, so we are actually an association existed to represent the community of marketers and sales professionals in Singapore itself. And largely membership-based, we have a membership base, and of course we do have a secretariat, that's our full-time staff that are operating MIS on a day-to-day basis. And MIS, we are actually a not-for-profit body. We are an NGO. We do have a charity arm that is the Marketing Institute of Singapore Business School. All right, Marketing Institute of Singapore Business School is a charity organization, but however, we're not an IPC, meaning we raise our own funds to fund our program. All right, and we do that as a matter of charity. In fact, we do give out a lot of scholarship. And there are a lot of lecturers like me, previously, that teach out of pro bono itself as a form of service back to the community. So if you want to find out more about us, I will not take up a lot of time from today's lecture. So you want to find out more about us, just approach one of our staff. I hope you can actually join us for more of our events, because we do have a lot of events, and today, like what I said, we are certainly very honored to partner as a venue sponsored to the Middle East Institute. All right, so without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Stephen Ho, my colleagues from the DBAC. A round of applause for Dr. Stephen Ho.
First and foremost, I'm here representing Professor Amy Wong, who has taken ill. She sends her apologies. Mr. Bilahari Kausikan, Honorary Fellow, Middle East Institute, NUS. Your Excellency Giuliano Cola, Deputy Commissioner, Embassy of Italy. Members of the SUSS DBAC community, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, colleagues, and students. A very good evening. So this speech was prepared by Professor Amy Wong, and I'll take this opportunity to share her speech with you. Thank you for joining us for the final session of this illuminating lecture series on navigating the new Middle Eastern landscape. It is indeed an honor to address you as we kick off the last and finale session of what has been a very transformative journey of insightful sessions. This series, jointly hosted by the SUSS, Singapore University of Social Sciences, DBA, alumni and graduate student community, the SUSS School of Business, and the NUS Middle East Institute, has provided us with a platform to explore and engage with some of the most complex and dynamic changes taking place across the Middle East today. Over the past 2 months, we have had the privilege of hearing from distinguished guests, speakers who have offered their expertise on a wide range of topics, from the reformation of the Gulf states to the energy sector's evolving role in the global economy. One of the key areas we have explored in this series is the ongoing social economic transformation in the Gulf. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are at the forefront of this shift. Their bold economic reforms under programs like Saudi Vision 2030 and the UAE Centennial 2071 are reshaping these nations, not only by reducing their reliance on oil, but also by diversifying into sectors such as tourism, technology, and green energy. These efforts are ushering in a new era of development, one characterized by innovation and a drive towards global leadership in non-oil international sectors. What struck many of us was the magnitude of these changes and how they represent more than just economic growth. These reforms are about redefining national identities, transforming societal structures, and positioning the Gulf states as key players in the future global economy. Our sessions have brought into focus the significant role that leadership, policymaking, and strategic vision are playing in this profound transformation. We also delved into the evolving cultural evolution and geopolitical relationships in the region, particularly with the historic diplomatic shifts seen between Israel and the Arab states, the normalization of relationship across the region. We have heard from experts on how these new partnerships are not just symbolic, but are already yielding tangible results in the areas like technology, defense, and commerce. These developments also open up new opportunities for economic integration and collaboration across a region long known for its divides. Our conversation also extended to one of the most critical sectors in the region, oil and energy. The Middle East has long been defined by this role as the world's primary oil supplier, and as global priorities shift towards sustainability and renewable energy sources, we are witnessing the gradual sunset of the oil industry. While this may signal challenges for oil-dependent economies, it also represents an incredible opportunity for innovation and leadership in the renewable energy space. The complexity of navigating this transition cannot be understated. Our discussions have also highlighted the intricate balancing act between continuing to harness the region's natural resources and positioning it for future growth. This balance will be crucial in ensuring the long-term economic stability of the region while contributing towards the global efforts in combating climate change. Hence, before we close this very remarkable series, this happens to be the sixth of 6 lecture series, and it started back in August. It is my great privilege and pleasure to introduce our speaker and someone who truly embodies the depth of expertise and insight that we have been privileged to experience throughout this session. Our distinguished guest speaker for tonight is Mr. Bilahari Kausikan, Honorary Fellow, Middle East Institute, NUS. Mr. Kausikan used to be the ambassador at large in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. From 2001 to May 2013, he was the second permanent secretary and subsequently the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He retired in 2013 after 33 years of illuminating service in the public sector. He has held a variety of appointments in the MFA, including Director for Southeast Asia, Director for East Asia, and the Pacific, and Deputy Secretary for Southeast Asia. He was also the permanent representative to the United Nations in New York from 1995 to 1998 and was ambassador to the Russian Federation in 1994 to 1995. He has been awarded the Public Administration Medal Gold and the Meritorious Service Award by the Singapore government. He was educated at Raffles Institution, the University of Singapore, and Columbia University in New York. Tonight, Mr. Kausikan will be addressing the Mirage of Stability in the Middle East, which ties together the themes we have explored throughout this series, from economic reform and cultural, geopolitical realignments to energy transition and the pursuit of stability. Insights from Mr. Kausikan's talk will not only deepen our understanding, but also provide us with a forward-looking perspective on the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of us, especially as we navigate the new Middle Eastern landscape. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Bilahari Kausikan.
Thanks. Thank you. That was probably too kind an introduction, but I will try my best. Although I am not going to talk too much about the exact topic. This title is a very big topic. In fact, what you are asking, is there something intrinsically unstable about the Middle East? Is there something that makes the Middle East intrinsically unstable? And it's a very big question, but I'm going to give you a very brief answer to that big question before narrowing down the scope of the question to something more manageable. Because if I try to answer the big question, it will take more than 6 lectures, believe me. Anyway, my very brief answer to the big question is yes, I at least think there's something intrinsically unstable about the Middle East. And the root cause of that is that with 3.5 exceptions, most of the polities of the Middle East are not viable states. They are not natural states. They are not internally coherent states. They are either failed states or failing states or very fragile states. That is why the efforts of the Gulf countries to reform not merely their economies but their societies is so very important, not just for the future of the Middle East, but I think for the future of Muslim communities throughout the world. Whether they succeed or whether they fail, it will have a profound impact. But of course, we must hope that they will succeed. The 3.5 exceptions to this, 3 of them are not Arab states. The half exception is Egypt. It is a viable state with an ancient history, although the continuity between ancient Egypt and modern Egypt is perhaps not as smooth as Egyptians like to pretend sometimes. But there is that continuity. I give it a half because it has been seriously mismanaged ever since its independence. The 3 viable states are not Arab states. They are Israel, they are Iran, and they are Turkey. The last 2, of course, in recent years have been very badly managed, but they are still coherent states with long histories as coherent states in one form or the other. I'll leave it there, and if you have questions, let's talk about it in the question time. But let me try to narrow down the scope of that question to something more manageable, but no less important. And that question is, where are we after about more than a year of war in the Middle East? Is the Middle East better or worse off after a year of war? My perhaps counterintuitive answer is that on the whole, the Middle East, and the world actually, is probably better off or will be better off, although many problems still lie ahead. This is probably very counterintuitive to what you have been reading in the press and the media and so on. So let me make one major qualification to that broad conclusion I had. My focus is geopolitical. The human cost of the war on both sides is horrifically high. And I'm not denying that. but my focus is geopolitical, and as I think I said at the very beginning of this lecture series, not every humanitarian disaster is of geopolitical consequence. That's a very hard fact of international relations. First, some perspective about the war after a year of the war. First, oil prices have not risen significantly. I can't say I've been tracking it every day, but I've been tracking it regularly over the last year. And the most it has gone up to is about 80 point something US dollars, the Brent crude index. Most of the time, it's been hovering around in the mid 70 US dollar range. And that's not very significant given the duration and the intensity of the war. Secondly, despite Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, I don't think, and I've checked with people who do logistics, my impression, which has been checked with others, is that the supply chain disruptions have not been very significant. There have been supply chain disruptions, of course, but they are not very significant. More or less, people have adapted. And perhaps that's because the big supply chain disruptions were caused by the pandemic, and that built in some resilience into how people approach their own supply chain. They realized they could be disrupted, and therefore they had plans, and actually the Houthis could not disrupt global trade in any very significant way. There have been disruptions, but not significant. Thirdly, I think another perspective, there have been four big wars in the Middle East. In 1948, when Israel declared independence, it was attacked by 5 Arab countries. And then 1956, 1967, and 1973. 1948 is a bit of an exception, so set that aside. But in 1956, 1967, and 1973, the concern was that conflict in the Middle East would lead to a wider global conflict because of the involvement of the Soviet Union and the US through their proxies in these conflicts. Today, the prospect of the war becoming entangled in US-China rivalry or broader geopolitical currents is nearly zero. Not zero, but almost zero. The war, as I thought from the beginning, and I think I told you at the beginning lecture, remains a sub-regional conflict centered on Gaza and Lebanon, with sporadic involvement by Iran and its proxies, but not in any, how shall I say, in any manner that is more than fairly ad hoc and not sustained. A truly regional conflict would involve not just Iran, which has not been keen to widen the conflict, it sent many signals to that effect, but Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states. And as I said, the prospect of this becoming a global conflict, which was the concern during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, is nearly zero. We can talk about that later if you like. Now, the possibility of this becoming a true region-wide conflict with Iran, the Gulf states, Egypt, and all getting involved is not zero, but I don't think it is particularly high. Thirdly, it's not going to become a global conflict because the hollowness of Chinese and Russian policy in the Middle East has been exposed over the last year. The Russians are completely committed in their own war, which they started, and they don't have the excess capability except on a diplomatic way, and frankly, diplomacy in the midst of war in the Middle East is more irrelevant than in most cases. The Chinese approach to the Middle East since the war started has been what I would call mainly performative. It's an act. Only the US has made, of all the major external powers, has made some difference, acting as offshore balancer. Now, with that, to give you some sense of perspective over the last year, which is often missing from the various press reports, which are sometimes too hysterical to my mind in tone and in content, why do I think the overall geopolitical situation in the Middle East has improved? Now, I'm going to paint my position in very, very broad strokes because I want to give maximum time for a discussion. I want this to be a dialogue, not a monologue. So if you have questions about points of detail, save it for question time. So why do I think that the overall geopolitical situation in the Middle East has improved? First of all, a common criticism of the Israeli action from a geopolitical point of view, not from a humanitarian point of view, is that despite its tactical successes, which are often been brilliant after some initial shakiness and complacency, their tactical actions have been brilliant, but it is often said it lacks strategic purpose. Now, I think this is only partially valid. And much depends on what you consider strategic purpose, how you define strategic purpose. Hamas is practically destroyed as a coherent organization. It is still dangerous, but it is dangerous in a very degraded way. It can launch sporadic, ad hoc kind of attacks. Its command, but not any kind of coherent, coordinated attack anymore. Its command structure is almost completely destroyed. Its military capabilities have been seriously degraded, both in terms of the commanders and in terms of material. Hezbollah is well on the way to meeting the same fate. Its command structure has been destroyed. Recently, the Israeli defense minister estimated that about 80% of its missile capability has been destroyed. Now, you may believe that or not, but even if you believe it, 20% of about 120 rockets is still quite serious, a serious amount. But I think that will be destroyed too, because Hezbollah has not been able to respond in any coherent way, because its command structure, its communication structure has been destroyed. And I think this will go on until it meets the fate of Hamas. The big problem Hezbollah poses are not its most sophisticated weapons, which are the ballistic missiles and the medium and long-range missiles. It is drones, which the Israelis have some difficulty in coping with, because they are low-tech, right? Their Iron Dome and the other kinds of missile defenses have not proved very effective against the drone. But even then, the damage in terms of damage to property, damage to Israel's military capability, and casualties as inflicted is minimal. It's not a significant factor. And this will go on. It may be that that Hezbollah is reserving the last 20% or so of the missiles it has. And it's 20% of what was estimated to be something between 120 and 150,000 missiles. So 20% is not minor. Remember that. But anyway, it is well on the way being degraded. Now, this is a very significant strategic change in the Middle East, because Hezbollah and Hamas were part of Iran's forward defense. Hezbollah was a gun pointed at Israel's head, because Iran's own defense capabilities, basically most of it dates from the 1970s. It's obsolete. How well they work, nobody knows. But Hezbollah in particular, to a smaller degree Hamas, and to an even smaller degree the Houthis, these were the outer ring of defense, and they were guns pointed at Israel's head. 2 out of those 3 guns have been destroyed. And that leaves Iran without any deterrence capability. Even Iran's missile capability, its ballistic missile capability, its cruise missile capability and things, they have launched something like 500 missiles at Israel. What is the total amount of damage those 500 missiles have caused? 2 Israeli women slightly injured, 1 Bedouin girl seriously injured, but as far as I know still alive, 1 Palestinian man on the West Bank killed, and an Israeli airfield slightly damaged, which has been repaired. And Israel has demonstrated the capability to take out all the most sophisticated air defenses around some of its critical infrastructure. Now, it's not just that the gun was removed from Israel's head. that gun was as much pointed at the head of the Gulf Arab monarchies. Right? And that has also been removed. And Iran itself, its defense capabilities have been exposed, as I said, as hollow. That's a huge strategic shift in the Middle East. What the implications are of that strategic shift, we will play out over some time, right? But it is a major shift in the Middle Eastern strategic geopolitical equation. What does this mean is that Israel has restored deterrence, which it lost on 7 October. And this was an existential question for Israel. It hasn't completely restored deterrence vis-a-vis Hezbollah, but this is going to go on. Hamas is a matter of hunting down individual people, hunting down small units, destroying them. I was in Israel about a month ago. I went to the border with Gaza. It's pretty quiet now. It wasn't at the beginning of the war, but it's pretty quiet now because the threat has been largely neutralized. That's why they have shifted focus to the West Bank, where the Iranians are trying to supply weapons to the jihadist elements on the West Bank, and to the northern front. Now, it's a valid question to ask whether the human cost of Israeli restoring deterrence is worth it. But it's a question you will ask only if you are not Israeli. Because to the Israelis, this is an existential issue. This is actually, I found, a popular war in Israel. It's not an unpopular war. I'm not saying people are out on the street waving flags and cheering the soldiers on, but there is a sense of stoic resolve. Reservists are getting tired because their cycles are getting thin. And of course, Israelis being Israelis, everybody has 5 opinions about how the war should be fought. But I didn't hear anybody saying the war should not be fought. There is some demonstrations, some criticism about whether or not enough has been done to release the hostages. But to be frank and to be very hard-headed about it, if you are fighting an existential war, you can't really be bothered too much. You cannot let the fate of 240 individuals drive your strategy. That is, at best, a second-order consideration. Right? If you are fighting any war, 240 people, in the larger scheme of things, cannot figure too large in how you make your calculations. The demonstrations against Netanyahu very largely have nothing to do with the war. They have to do with what he is accused of doing to change the nature of Israeli society. And that may have a long-term effect, but that's really what people are much more upset about than the war. The Gulf, so I think Israel is more secure. Well, not only Israel, I think the Gulf monarchies are also more secure. Because I said that gun was as much pointed at their heads as it was against Israel. And that is why I think that the Iranian threat to them has not disappeared, but it has been blunted. And I think I told you in the first talk I gave at the beginning that Iran is the key strategic issue for all the Gulf monarchies. It's not Palestine issue. Palestine issue is a second or third order issue. There have been, for the Gulf monarchies, the human cost is a domestic political problem for them to manage. They are not displeased at the destruction of Hamas and the imminent destruction of Hezbollah. They made some token protests when Hamas was being destroyed. I don't hear any protests about what's happening in Lebanon against Hezbollah. Nothing significant anyway. And nobody who was a member of the Abraham Accords has left it. Still. The Abraham Accords is essentially an American-sponsored anti-Iranian alliance in which Israel provides the military heft and the Arab states provide legitimacy to Israel. That's the deal, basically, on which the Abraham Accords. And the military heft has certainly been proven. I'll come back to this point because it's not all rosy. Huh? And I think the destruction of Hamas and the ongoing destruction of Hezbollah is not merely in the interest of Israel and the Gulf Arab monarchies, but in the interest of the whole world. First of all, these are terrorist organizations, and they have launched attacks around the world. For example, Hezbollah has not so long ago, tried to assassinate the Israeli ambassador in Bangkok. Right? One part of Hezbollah, anyway. And one part of the Iranian Al-Quds force. The only people who probably are dismayed at this are those countries that are irredeemably anti-Western. You know, Russia, China, North Korea, and of course Iran itself. Now, I earlier said that the question of whether Israel has an overall strategic purpose is a partially varied question. I say there is a strategic purpose, and I've just described it. Right? It has changed, at least for now, the balance of power, the strategic calculus of the Middle East. But it is not totally invalid to ask that question. And what are the downsides? First, while the strategic shifts do offer new opportunities, just like, for example, the strategic shift after the 1973 war led to the Madrid process, led to the Oslo Accords, it does create new opportunities for a new approach to the Palestinian issue. However, unfortunately, I do not think the opportunities will be taken. I think and that's the reason for that is the internal situation in Israel. I think we underestimate, and even I was in the US recently too, Americans underestimate the extent to which 7 October was traumatic to Israeli society and has shifted the entire political spectrum rightwards. What was the left and the center, and in Israel, the left and center are defined in relation to the Palestinian issue and whether there should be a two-state solution or not. That is the basic definition. People that were to the left in that way and on the center in that way have all shifted right. In fact, to talk about two states, to utter the phrase two state, is a bad word in Israel these days. I don't think this will remain forever, but it will remain for the foreseeable future. The basic attitude, the most accommodating attitude when I talk to people about it is that, yes, you're right, but let's finish this off first. And then we can think about it later. And I can't say I personally cannot blame them. So I don't think if there are opportunities, they will be taken, not for the foreseeable future. In this respect, I think the 7th October attack was a strategic blunder by Hamas, by Sinwar, because it has made even the aspiration for a Palestinian state recede even further into the future. Of course, we have to keep the idea alive, because that idea gives some hope for some measure of stability in the future, but not for the foreseeable future. The foreseeable future, if there is going to be stability, is going to be on the restoration of deterrence in that region. Deterrence at the macro level provided by the US as an offshore balancer, and at the micro level by Israel. Second downside, I think, is that Jordan is in an extremely precarious situation. Jordan is a fragile state, but it is geopolitically an extremely important state. Without Jordan as a reasonably coherent entity, you can't even think of keeping a two-state solution alive, even as an aspiration. And it will completely impose grievous dilemmas, not just to Israel, but to Egypt. And Egypt is the largest country in the Middle East, and if Egypt is destabilized, it doesn't bear thinking about. So we need to support Jordan. I think Jordan deserves, not because out of charity, out of self-interest, much more support from the world than it has received so far. It's received quite a lot of support. That's not the case. But I think it needs much more. It is in a precarious situation. And the third downside, as I said, the hollowness of the Iranian military capability has been exposed for everybody to see, including Iranians, right? And now if I was an Iranian general, I'll be thinking long and hard about this. I said, I gave them the best shot. I shot off at almost 500 missiles on my best types at Israel, and the damage is trivial. It's even laughable. So I'll be thinking long and hard about this, and I fear they will come to the conclusion, which is the only logical conclusion, that I need an independent nuclear deterrent. I need a nuclear deterrent. What this means, and this is my absolutely last point, and then I'll take questions. Yes, I'm on time for what I had in my mind. It means that a big war in the Middle East is well nigh inevitable. I told you in the first lecture, this is not that big war. Because that big war will be fought over Iranian nuclear capability. It's not going to be fought over Palestine. Palestine just isn't worth it to any of the major players. Now, Iran is a geopolitical reality in the Middle East that can never be ignored, whatever you may think about the regime. You have to deal with Iran. But I don't think either Israel or Saudi Arabia or the UAE or the United States will tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran, or even an Iran that is at threshold status, very close to threshold status. It is estimated Iran can have enough fissionable material to make a nuclear device within a few months. Fissionable material is the most difficult factor in order to get hold of the fissionable material is the most difficult factor in order to create a nuclear weapon. The rest will follow, right? It can probably do that, it is estimated, within a few months. But that doesn't mean it's going to have a nuclear weapon within a few months. But I don't think Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the United States will tolerate a nuclear weapon-armed Iran. And the only way to stop them is through war, a big war. However, I don't think that war is imminent because neither Iran, Israel, nor the United States is ready for that big war. But I think it will come, not now, not next week, not next month, not next year, not maybe in the next 5 years, but come it will. And on that very optimistic note, or what passes for optimism in the Middle East, I will stop and take your questions. Should I stay up here, or can I have a chair? Yeah, just.
So you may take a seat, and I'll help in today's moderating sessions. Can I just sit a bit closer to you? Okay. Hi. I think.
My wife will get jealous.
I think not from me, perhaps. Probably from some of the ladies out there. Okay, hang on, sir. First and foremost, thank you for your very insightful view on the situations right now, largely on geopolitical, although not on the humanitarian part. But I believe there are a lot of questions from the floor itself. Okay, so we'll take turns to actually take those questions, and then perhaps, Mr. Kausikan, do you actually help us in terms of the answering of the questions? Okay, so let's keep it short in terms of questions coming in, but of course, we will value your time and your view on those questions.
Sure.
Okay, right, first questions, I think there's a gentleman, yes sir, please.
Yes,
Then,
thank you.
we'll come to you next.
Could you identify yourself, please?
I was just about to. So yes, my name's Thomas Mianjiri, and I focus on energy and energy transition, but I also track geopolitics, Middle East in particular. I just quick question to please the moderator. We got the U.S. election coming up. Following the election, do you think Israel's hand would be freed to attack Iran during this, lame duck session of Biden's administration, to do some of the things that you suggested, like kind of clean things up, degrade their capabilities even further when they have this window of opportunity, this political window of opportunity in the U.S.?
Shall we take a couple of questions and answer them in clusters?
Sure, by all means, sir.
Yeah, my name is Francis. I have this question.
Where are you from, Francis?
Oh, I'm self-employed.
Okay, okay, that's a good job. That's the most.
I like it.
Yeah, we like the job. Self-employed. Okay, good. So,
I've actually got two questions. This is a follow-up to your first question, right? Which is that depending on who wins the election on November the 5th, I think to me, and I would like to ask for opinion, if the Democrats win, likely the war will weaken Israel, all right?
Whoa, what, Israel? Weaken.
Weaken.
Oh, okay.
So similarly, if Trump wins, Israel will be strengthened. That's my first question. In your opinion. Second question is that, in your opinion, after the war is over, there will definitely be a Marshall Plan. And who will come in to help the Palestinians, or maybe even Lebanon? Yeah.
very good question, sir. So we'd like to proceed
Yeah,
with the
I'll
answer.
take, because they are
Sure.
kind of the first two questions are kind of connected. Huh?
Sorry.
First of all, I don't think the result of the election, the US election, will have a very significant effect, regardless of who wins, on whether Israel will launch a major attack on Iran. I think the considerations are different. The considerations will be that if you're going to launch an attack on Iran's critical infrastructure and Iran's nuclear facilities, you need the US behind its back. So the lame duck time is not a good time. You need the lame duck. You need somebody behind your back. Secondly, I think Biden advised Israel against attacking the critical infrastructure and the nuclear facilities. And Israel took his advice, not just because they need the US at their back, because I don't think the Israelis themselves are ready yet. The war exposed the strength of the IDF. It also exposed some weaknesses of the IDF, not serious weaknesses, but still weaknesses. If you're going to fight a big war, you're going to have to fix before you go on. Now, I think it's a fool's game to try to predict who's going to win the election. It's so close that you might as well flip a coin. Huh? Right. But I think it's not going to make as much difference this time. If it's Kamala Harris, she'll be a little bit more beholden to the progressive wing of the Democrat Party. So she'll be a little bit more critical of Israel, but it's not as if she's going to abandon Israel. She'll put more pressure on Israel on humanitarian grounds and so on, but she's not going to stop supplying Israel with munitions and so on. Because Israel is the only kind of reliable partner, troublesome but reliable partner the US has in the entire Middle East. Reliable in the sense of have the capability to do things. Huh? Okay. So I don't think it's going to be that significant a factor. There will be a bit more pressure on Israel to allow more aid to Gaza and so on, and perhaps a bit more criticism of Israel. They will think longer about supplying certain kinds of munitions and so on, but I don't think they will cut Israel off. So the strength and weakening of Israel is not going to be significantly affected by the outcome of the election. Some effect, but marginal effect. Your other question, Francis, is it? I think it's a very good one. I told you, and it's kind of connected in a different way to something I said earlier. I told you I think that the Abraham Accords is really an anti-Iran alliance in which the military heft is provided by Israel and the legitimacy is provided by the Arab states. I think Saudi Arabia has always been wanting to join the Abraham Accords, and I think in substantive terms, its desire to join the Abraham Accords has probably been enhanced because Israel is proved to be a very effective military instrument. And I told the Israelis this, but I said that Saudis need a Palestinian fig leaf. to allow them the political cover to join. And that fig leaf can be a kind of Marshall Plan to rebuild Gaza. And I think the Saudis will be prepared to fund it with the help of UAE and others, other people we asked to chip in. I think it can be. Unfortunately, I don't think the time is right for anybody to suggest this, because the war isn't quite over yet. The Gaza part has gone into low intensity. There's still high intensity, and the two things in the strategic calculations of Israel are connected. So it will have to come sometime down the road. How long, I don't know, but sometime down the road. As well as the internal situation in Israel has to calm down a bit. And that's not, I can't see it happening in the foreseeable future. But I think it is not possible, it's not impossible to put together, not a Marshall Plan, a rebuilding, a plan to rebuild Gaza, because it will have to be rebuilt anyway. And some parts of southern Lebanon have to be rebuilt, but it will have to be rebuilt under some kind of supervision, so that what is built is not a new network of tunnels, ammunition dumps, and so on, right? And that's where the tricky part comes in, right? Right? So it's not impossible, but it's not imminent. But I think the funding and so on is the simplest part. I think the Saudis and the Arab states and other countries will be prepared to fund it, but it's how you supervise the rebuilding so that it is not going to, you're not going to let Hamas and Hezbollah rebuild their whole military hard infrastructure again.
Okay, I hope that, yeah, King Xiong. Your Excellency, perhaps later, after him. King Xiong, please go ahead.
I'm King Xiong here. I'm co-president of the SUSS-DBAC. I have two questions. Firstly is that how do you see the current campaign or current conflict ending? When do you think that the Israelis will call it enough is enough, it's time for us to pause? No time frame, because I don't think there is any time frame. The second question is that I noticed that the ambassador is here, and a big chunk of the world has not been mentioned during your lecture. And what role does the Europeans have to play in this entire conflict?
Maybe I take both questions.
Good evening. What I would like to ask, and it connects with this question, in your opinion, given the current political establishment in Iran, is there still a space for an agreement, a kind of common grounds could be found? And I want to ask too, in your opinion, which role could Europe play on this particular subject?
Space in Iran for agreement. Did you say?
No, I mean an agreement between Iran and the West and the US, and to, let's say, cool down the whole situation.
Okay. You're talking about the nuclear issue specifically or more generally? More generally. Okay, got it. Okay, let me take these two questions or three questions, quick questions. First, I think how it ends. It ends when the Israeli, I told you, for them, this is an existential issue. So it will end when they realize, when they think that the deterrence has been restored enough that they can take a risk. I don't think we are near that yet. We are fairly close to that in Hamas, but it will go down to, it's already in a low intensity there. It's shifted to the West Bank. To them, this is the same thing, because what they say is that Hamas being destroyed as a coherent organization, the supply of weapons is shifted to the West Bank. That's why they're going after the West Bank in a big way. That's one factor, right? And Hezbollah, I think it's well on the way to being degraded as a coherent organization, but not quite there yet, right? Whether you believe the Israeli defense minister that they destroyed 80% of the missile capability, that 20% is still quite a lot, given that the large absolute numbers. And if I was Israeli, I wouldn't take a risk, right? So that's one factor. The other factor is the economic one. the most productive and the one that contributes most to GDP is the high-tech sector. That is still going on all right, but not good. Obviously, you can't have your reservists getting pulled out of the economy in closer and closer cycles without having some effect. But I don't think the pain yet is sufficient to outweigh the factor of existential deterrence. Now that, I cannot give you a time frame. I think rather than thinking of an end, it's probably better to think of wars tapering off, going into lower and lower intensity, and then at some point you can start talking seriously about a ceasefire, if not a settlement. And then you can start talking about a plan to rebuild, which can be the Palestinian fig leaf for the Saudis, right? Europe's role. I'm sorry to say, I think Europe has no role, except performative. Because I don't think Europe knows how much disillusionment there is in Israel with Europe. They'll be polite to you, of course, but they don't trust you at all. Right? So you have a role there, because 2 European countries are permanent members of the Security Council, and at some point you will have to bring them in. But frankly, any substantive role, I don't believe Israel will allow you to have any substantive role, because they don't trust you. Simple as that. They don't trust the EU as the EU, and they don't trust France in particular, with Macron saying all kinds of things. Mind you, many Europeans don't trust Macron either. So it's rather than thinking of a role for Europe, you might want to think of a role for particular European countries. I think the level of distrust is there, but it's not even across 27 countries. Right? So we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, it's too early. Is there space for Europe to play a role with Iran? That is one of the reasons why they don't trust you. The very fact that that idea is in the European consciousness means that there is a certain reservation in the way Israel looks at Europe. Right? JCPOA, I don't think so, in any form. Right? I don't personally think that original JCPOA was such a big deal anyway. Right? The best you could say about it was better than nothing. Right? It bought a little bit of time. Right? But that's water under the bridge. As I said, there probably is, and I'm guessing here, some measure of internal debate in Iran about its military capabilities and what place the nuclear dimension to play in those military capabilities. Right? So until that is settled, there is really very little room. Of course, the Iranians would like to engage Europe, engage the West, to buy time. Don't forget, I always find it very misleading when we talk, not just vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis any authoritarian system of hardliners and reformers. Because don't forget that, and the archetypical case of this is actually China, as well as Iran. When you talk about reform in such context, you're already talking about reform in order to entrench the system, not to change it, to preserve the system. So there is a lot of internal problems in Iran. Therefore, the supreme leader allowed, I think that's not an exaggeration to say that, allowed a relatively less hardline person to stand for election and be elected. Right? But that's a very different thing to say that they really want to engage the West. They want to engage the West to get some relief from the sanctions, which is not stopping them pursuing the nuclear capability, but certainly hurting society as a whole, and there's a lot of social unrest or unease in Iran. And they know it, and they want to stabilize that. So there may be a role that way, but that role, in a way, to my mind, precludes a substantive role on the substance of the issues, because that's precisely why Israel doesn't trust Europe.
Okay, any questions from the floor? So, can we have a mic for Amin?
There's a mic somewhere around.
Yeah, because we have recordings. And for those online, if there are any questions that you need to ask, you are welcome to post. Maybe Prof. Amin, I think he has the mic, so we allow him to speak, and then next we'll come back to you. So please identify yourself from the back, and we can't see you from there.
Thank you so much for your talk. My
Yeah,
name
you
is,
need to put the mic closer to you.
Thanks so much for the talk. My name is Im. I have two questions. If you look in the US, in the demographic data, opinion polls of young people, they tend to be more pro-Palestinian, skeptical of the actions of Israel. What if that trend continues in the future? So it won't have any impact on this current election, as you mentioned, not in the next 5 years, but what if in the next 10, 20 years, the US takes a more, let's say, neutral stance and backs off as a backer of Israel? What would be the effect on the Israeli state? Second question is, what if Israel is very effective in dismantling the military capabilities of the Iranian proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis? What if the military capabilities of Iran are degraded? What kind of incentive would the Arab states still have in that case to be on friendly terms with Israel?
Okay, those are good questions. Oh yeah, please, then I'll take them more.
Okay, hello. My question kind of a bit different. Because I totally agree with what you have just said about the fact that most of the Arab nations are actually happy for Israel to do their dirty work in clearing Hamas and Hezbollah. Yeah. The problem as I see it, and it also exposed the inability of the Arab nations to take any stand against Israel. And the Arab street had always this myth of hopes that Iran is their defender, and which is now, it's even exposed as not being able to take a stand against Israel. So my fear, and I just want to hear your opinion on this, my fear is if a lot of people in the Arab street actually give up hope on any sort of organized thing, in the sense that they have already were disappointed with the Arab Spring and its outcome, and now they see the Israeli taking a position, a very strong position against Palestinians and Hezbollah, and nobody standing up. And my fear is if whether we see kind of back to the late 60s and early 70s, where more and more small groups become more fanatic and a lot of lone wolf terrorism. And the biggest fear even is that they will realize that Israel is very well security, that this terrorism will be taken in the outside world against Israeli whatever, embassies and other stuff. And like we saw the lone wolf of the truck hitting the bus in Tel Aviv. So this is my fear. I don't know whether you have any view on that.
I share your fear. I absolutely share your fear. And that is why the basic theme of this whole lecture series is so important. The ability of the Sunni Arab monarchies in particular to reform their economies, to reform their societies. Because there were two factors that were very consequential. One is, of course, the Iranian Revolution, but the other is the Arab Spring. Those two factors changed the strategic calculations of all the Arab states, the Sunni monarchies anyway, with the slight exception of Qatar and Oman. Right? They changed it from, they shifted the Palestinian issue. The Palestinian issue was already shifting from center stage to the side. Because after 4 wars, and you can't get anywhere by war, Egypt recognizing Israel, Jordan recognizing Israel, the priorities changed. So therefore, there was this more serious effort to change their societies, to put their societies on a much more sustainable basis, right? And I think in the long term, that is a much more consequent. But I share your fear. It can be mitigated if they are successful as states. If they are failures as states and you have this situation, habis lah. Okay? Okay, so I share your fear, all right? Second, the question, young people, I think that's a good point. I go to the US quite often, twice a year, and I go, among other places, I go to university campuses, and I had a look. I think it's a bit early to tell how much of a lasting phenomenon this is. 37 years a diplomat has made me somewhat cynical, and I look at all these young people, and I wonder how much of it is fashion. Yes, there are certain hardcore people who are really committed, I don't deny that. But I think in any such movement, the number of the hardcore is always small, right? And they have the followers, but are the followers following them because it's fashion? Or is it real conviction? I think that is a question that only time can tell. Will these convictions last when these guys graduate, go out into the world, have to get a job, pay off a mortgage, pay off a student loan, raise a family? I think time will tell. I think the thing that is probably more worrying, if I was Israeli, is the dilution of American Jewish identity through intermarriage, through people identifying themselves as Jews, of course, but not really. At very least, you got to keep the Shabbat, if nothing else, right? And maybe some gesture at a high holiday. But I think, and some of my Israeli and some of my American friends tell me, Jewish friends, tell me that is gradually being eroded. If I was Israel, I would worry about that a bit more than this protest. But you are right, if this goes on, if I am wrong, and this is more than fashion, and this is a new trend, coupled with the dilution of American Jewish identity, then one factor is going to be, one factor that leads to American support for Israel is going to be diluted. But it's only one factor. Don't forget, it was not until America was pretty ambivalent about Israel until after the _67 war, when the defeated countries brought in the Soviet Union, and then they looked around and there's only one really reliable person around in the Middle East for them from their point of view, and that's Israel. Before that, the American attitude towards Israel was ambivalent, right? And don't forget, in the '67 war, the Israelis, I think deliberately, shot up an American naval vessel to tell the Americans back off a bit, right? So it is one factor, but I don't think it's the only factor, because America will always need some reliable partners in the Middle East, and Israel will have to be one, particularly since Erdogan is doing all kinds of weird things, and he's a NATO member, you know. So, yes, but I think, let's wait and see. In any case, it's only one factor. Israel has indeed been very effective in dismantling Iranian proxies. And that's why I said the strategic purpose is, there is a strategic purpose, but there are also important questions. Having dismantled this bunch of proxies, unless you have some kind of broader political framework, new proxies can be created, because Iran is always going to be there as a geopolitical fact. A strong Iran or a weak Iran is still a geopolitical fact you cannot ignore, right? So that is the big question mark about the current reshuffling of the geopolitical equation that I have. And I don't have an answer.
Yeah. Can we have the mic to pass to SK? Thanks.
I'm SK from my MIS, right? So given Israel's current track record of winning wars, gaining territories, ignoring UN instructions, right? Are we going to see a new Israel map after all this subsided? A new Israeli map. Like they'll take part of southern Lebanon, they'll have a reshaped Gaza, and you know, and in the world, which country can step in and restore the balance back in Middle East?
Well, to answer your question, first of all, the UN instructions are always, I've worked in the UN, they're always couched in extremely ambiguous terms. That's the only way to get a resolution most of the time. Security Council resolution, the General Assembly resolutions don't count at all. They are not legally binding on anybody. And the most famous UN resolution is 242, adopted after Security Council resolution after the Six-Day War, 67 war, and it's a masterpiece of ambiguity. You can read it 15 times and everybody can read it the way they want. In other words, it means nothing. That's why you have a resolution. And then somebody told me that there are significant differences between the French, the Russian, and the English version. So that's why you have the resolution. Everybody refers to it. It settles nothing. There hasn't been any serious resolution this time except to allow aid more on the humanitarian front. And that one, I think, has nothing to do with territory. I don't think you're going to see a redrawing of the map. I don't think Israel is keen. There are some people in Israel that want to restore, to annex Judea and Samaria, which the rest of us know as the West Bank, right? But I don't think that is the mainstream view, right? So I think what you're not going to see annexations as you saw after the Six-Day War, right? And more recently. I think what you're going to see is the creation of buffer zones in southern Lebanon. That is the declared war aim, actually, to push Hezbollah, destroy all their military, push them beyond the river. Right? And I think you're going to see something like that in Gaza and on the West Bank. But that is not going to be, it's not going to be annexed or change the map. It will change the map, but in a formalistic way, not in a real way. The big question that nobody has really pondered, which is connected to your question, Francis, about the rebuilding of Gaza and southern Lebanon, is who's going to supervise all this? Having worked in the UN, I can tell you the UN is not capable. And having had the Israelis having had the experience of UNRWA and UNIFIL, they're not going to trust the UN either. I don't know, you read this story, it was a big story, but it didn't get much publicity. When they went into southern Lebanon, they discovered a huge underground complex by Hezbollah, 100 meters from a UNIFIL observation post. So obviously, they were not observing very well. Okay? So I don't think Israelis will trust the UN, but you don't trust the UN, who do you trust? There must be some form of supervision of these buffer zones, right? And Israelis will want to have a say, but they want to have a partner they can work with. And that partner must be also acceptable as a fig leaf, if nothing else, for the rest of the world. For the Arab street, if not the Arab government, right? So that's the big problem that I can't see any solution to. If you work in the UN, you get a very realistic view of the UN, and there are things that only the UN can do, and it does quite well. But there are some things it just cannot do, and one of the major UN's purpose is to act as an alibi for people who don't want to do things. When I was serving the UN, the big issue was the Balkans. And the Permanent Five, and the Europeans, and the Americans, and many countries were passing resolutions in the Security Council saying this genocide in the Balkans must stop, and we will take all necessary measures. That's UN speak for using force, all necessary measures for using. At the same time, their diplomats were crawling up the back stairs to the 37th floor, where the Secretary General's office is, and saying, we don't mean this. Don't you dare take it seriously. So you work in the UN, you get quite a different view of it.
Yep. Sir, if you want, perhaps one last question from the floor. If there are any online, do let me know. If there isn't, then sir.
Just in very short terms, I would like to know, in your opinion, you said, in your opinion, there will be a war within not a very long time with Iran. Can we avoid it? Is there a way to avoid it? And in your opinion, how could it be avoided?
Unfortunately, I don't see the war will be fought over Iranian's nuclear capability. I think it can be postponed, but I don't see any way of stopping Iran without war. Iran, by the way, Iran's nuclear ambitions are not just, did not start with the Islamic regime, you know. The Shah had them too. And its roots is actually in the Iranian sense of themselves. I am mighty Persia. I am the font of all civilizations. If you know, this insignificant country on the far side of the world, who I never heard of, called North Korea, can sit down and talk on equal terms with the US. Why? Because they have nuclear weapons. If this country of no significance and no culture is treated that way because they have nuclear weapons, of course I, mighty Persia, must have nuclear weapons. It's against the order of nature for me not to. I am patient, I can wait, because I'm a civilization that will be here when all of you, are crumbled into dust. But I must have them, and if I think I must have them, and my timeline is speeded up because all my conventional weapons, my best shot, has proven not so good after all, it might speed up the thought process. There is some debate, I'm sure, within Iran about what to do, right, in this respect. But I cannot think, so you can probably delay this big war, but I don't see how you can avoid it, because how can you stop Iran if this is the fundamental cause, their sense of identity? And it is a fact, that all the major powers in the world, and some not so major, are major powers because they have nuclear weapons. Right? Why should France and UK be permanent members of the Security Council? They won the First World War, the Second World War, so what? Right? Why shouldn't Italy then? My good friend, I don't know if you know him, Paolo Cufucci, he's passed away, right? He was a very good friend of mine. He was dead against Security Council reform, to let in Germany in particular, and he once told me, we lost the war too, why should Germany get in? Right? And why should so I told Paolo, why don't you make this case? You're all a European Union, you have a common foreign and security policy, so why should Europe have 2 seats? Why don't you all share the seat and rotate among Europe, and that the extra seat can go to, say, Africa or Asia or someplace else? And he thought long and hard about it and said, no, Bilahari, it's too much. It's a European, I cannot make that opinion. But you see, they are there because they won the Second World War, and they are considered great powers, among other reasons, because they have nuclear weapons. So if they have nuclear weapons, and it's because of the sense of identity, there is no way to stop Iran short of war. You can delay it. And I don't think war is imminent, by the way. It's not next week, next year. I don't think it's the next 5 years, the next 10 years even, if the Iranians are smart. But that also depends on what I think is an internal debate going on in Iran. They may decide to make a dash for it. Right? They make a dash for it, then war will come sooner. But I really cannot think of any way to stop them short of war, unless you are willing to acquiesce in a nuclear Iran. But that will mean a different kind of Iran. And I don't see regime change as a viable option for Iran either. Regime change never ends well,
As long as they are violent, usually they do not. But as long as there is a major shock in the system, it is difficult for the system to reach a stable solution, stable, say, situation. But of course, we cannot know about it.
I think actually the Iranian regime, to my mind, is quite resilient.
Yeah.
I think it's quite
For sure
resilient.
it is.
So
because they have a very
about
strong also militia forces. So beyond, I don't know, the Air Force, which is non-existent.
No, the Air Force is like 1970s.
They have 20 F-14s, which have not been upgraded, and they're still date back from the Shah period, and a few Phantoms and a few F-5, but of course, they are no match.
That's why if I was an Iranian, I had ballistic missiles. I thought they were pretty good, right? And they turned out to be not so good. If I was an Iranian general, I would really think seriously about how I can speed up getting a nuclear option for my own deterrence. The kind of forward defense shield that was provided by Hezbollah and Hamas and Houthi, two sections of that have been seriously degraded. So I don't have that anymore. The gun I thought that I pointed at Israel and pointed at the Arab monarchies is proven to be a dud or destroyed. So if I'm an Iranian general, I would argue strongly I must have a nuclear deterrent. Not just because I'm great Iran, but primarily because I'm great Iran, but also for my own self-defense. Now I cannot defend myself. It's proven. I cannot deter by conventional means. So how do you deter? By nuclear means. And if they go that route, there will be a war. Because how else to stop them?
Maybe there will be, I don't know. I'm thinking, I was asking if there is anything which may convince Iran to defuse this kind of threat, which could be acceptable for Iran.
I don't think so. I don't think so, because the nuclear ambition was from the Shah's time, because it arises from their sense of greatness. Right? The font of all civilization is Iran. That's what they think. Sincerely. They do sincerely think that. A Shah with nuclear weapons might be marginally more acceptable than an Islamist regime, particularly one that has a very messianic view of the world. Right? I'm afraid the genie is out of the bottle, actually, because I don't see any possibility of regime change in Iran. And Mohammed bin Salman has said, if Iran goes nuclear, I will not be far behind. And I believe the Saudis have already got an option on the nuclear weapons, because I think they finance the Pakistani program. So,
Professor Khan, the old times, and so on. No, you were Professor Khan in Pakistan who developed all the systems.
But who paid it?
Yeah.
No, Professor Khan was the brain.
Yes, yes.
The Saudi was the financier.
Okay, I think we have really extended. Okay, I'll take just one last question from the floor and we'll call it a day. How's it? Otherwise, we can always call for another series, sir.
No.
If there are more questions from the floor, or perhaps from the public itself. So yes, please, ma'am, please identify yourself and where you're from.
Thank you so much. My name is Gadan. I'm from NTU RSIS. I would like just to ask Ambassador Bilahari about the future. Would you please elaborate more on the future of Gaza in light of the calls for by the Israeli side for reconstruction of settlements in Gaza by the far-right party in Israel?
I think much will depend on the direction of Israeli politics. I think Netanyahu's toleration of these calls is because he needs to keep his coalition together. I don't think there's much appetite or eagerness for the reoccupation of Gaza. I don't think so. I think where there is where you probably find a consensus finally emerging is a few more settlements on the West Bank and a buffer zone in Gaza. And a buffer zone on the areas of the West Bank that are contiguous to Israel. Right? I think basically the buffer zone will be what now is called Area B. Right? You know, in the Oslo Accords. Right? I mean, this is my guess. Right? If I put myself in Israel, as an Israeli strategic thinker's shoes, this is what I would have vaguely. But right now, people are not really thinking of the day after yet. They're still going to fight the war. When they are convinced that Hamas is completely degraded and destroyed as a coherent organization, ditto for Hezbollah, at least south of the river, then they will start thinking in this way. But I don't. This is all my guess, by the way. But I don't think there's going to be. There are these fanatical groups who want to reoccupy Gaza, who said it was all a mistake to have left in the first place, and so on, right? But I don't think that is an idea that will gain widespread support. Few more settlements on the West Bank, yeah. but not reoccupation or annexation.
Okay, all right. So I think we've reached to our end of today's discussion, and perhaps we would like to give a round of applause to Mr. Kausikan for your views. There's certainly a lot of questions to be asked, I think, by some of you. So you're welcome, sir. If you can, do join us.
I'll go on you for a while, but I have to go and meet somebody in a while.
Sure. And in your definition of UN itself, I don't know. It sounds like
No,
not effective, and perhaps
the UN is not a magic palace, where all your wishes come true. It's a political organization. It is useful in certain things. It is completely useless in certain other things. But on the whole, it's better to have the UN than have no UN.
Okay, that's in your very own words. But anyway, thanks for coming. So at this juncture, I would like to invite Dr. Stephen Ho, which is our Secretary General of our DBAC from SUSS, to say a few words, perhaps your closing remark. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I promise not to hold you, to stand between you and dinner. But as we come to the close of this ME101 Lecture Series, I can't help but reflect on the journey that we have taken together. It's been a short 2 months, but it feels much longer, and obviously Middle East has a much longer history than 2 months. And personally, having spent almost 8 years in the Middle East, I would safely say that in this one evening alone, I learned more about the Middle East than I ever did in my 8 years in the Middle East. So a very warm round of applause again, please, for Mr. Bilahari Kausikan. When we started this series, we aimed to offer a very unique perspective on the region's very complex history, as much has been discussed, remarkable economic transformation, pressing climate changes, and more interestingly, perhaps, the growing intersections with Asia, and particularly Singapore. Throughout these 6 sessions, we have covered lots of grounds, covering crucial themes like historical context and evolution, economic transformation, strategic alliances and diplomacies, culture, social, climate, sustainability, so on and so forth. I would like now to take a moment to acknowledge those who have actually played a very pivotal role in this, bringing to life this very interesting series. And as I call out the name, I would like to invite those who I call out to please stand. A special thanks must definitely go out to Dr. Clemens Che from the Middle East Institute, NUS. Clement, yes? Who began this planning journey with me in March this year. So as you can imagine, it took us a while to get to this point. Right? We started 2 of us having the conversation. How should we put this series together? What should we talk about? Is it more of history, historical perspective? Is it more of future? But we wanted a balance. Right? Of course, Mr. Carl Skadian, if I pronounce your name properly, Senior Associate Director of MUS MEI. Carl. And of course, our lovely Miss Sharon Kong, the Head of Logistics from NUS MEI again. We spent countless sessions together trying to figure out where should the venue be, how to get people organized, who can we invite, and then over time, the series grew from strength to strength. And as you can see from today's turnout, we have a wide representation of audience who asked very insightful, and in the words of Mr. Bilahari Kausikan, very good question. All right? And I think I heard that several times during this evening. My gratitude also extends to the Marketing Institute of Singapore for being the venue sponsor, and in particular, my good friend here, Mr. Roger Wang, who is the president of MIS and who's also the vice chairman of SUSS DBAC. And of course, to Karen and Bonita, where are they? Karen and Bonita? Yes. They've been working tirelessly to put all these things together. To our lecturers, speakers, subject matter experts, a very big thank you for sharing your knowledge and inspiring critical talks amongst us. I'm also especially grateful for the encouragement and support from the SUSS leadership, President Professor Tan Tai Yong, Professor Robbie Goh, our Provost, Deputy Provost, Professor Alan Chia, and of course our Dean of Business School, Professor Ting Ting. They have been super supportive when we first came together. And I still remember very clearly the email that I received from NUS to our president. And then somewhere along the way, he got to me. Right? And that's where we started our conversation with Dr. Che. A very warm thanks as well to the entire project team, the volunteers, the staff who have been working tirelessly to bring the logistics and marketing together. And to our participants, and especially, a very big thank you for your enthusiasm. I mean, I totally enjoyed the session because I learned so much, as I mentioned, in that last 1 hour or so, more than I ever did in my 8 years in the Middle East. All the very interesting and insightful questions that was asked really sparked me off in thinking of what is happening today and what is likely to happen tomorrow, hopefully in a good way. And in closing, I would like to encourage all of us to continue engaging with the evolving landscape of the Middle East. And as illustrated by the recent visit by the UAE Crown Prince to Singapore, interest is again building. I happen to spend quite a fair bit of my time in the UAE actually, in Abu Dhabi. Right, so I spent a lot of time. I was in the GCC, the Rich Man's Club, right, Qatar, Saudi, Kuwait, and so on and so forth. And we also do hope that you continue to stay connected with us. And in the spirit of SUSS, we dream, we dare, and we do. We have this philosophy of curiosity, exploration, and to bring a positive impact to the world. And once again, in closing, a very big thank you to all of us. And please give all of us a very warm round of applause to yourself. Thank you very much. Okay, next.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Stephen, for his very, I would say, very nice speech. Very nice closure to all of you. I think the online perhaps we can off. So we have reached the second half of tonight's evening. So on behalf of MIS, we would like to actually acknowledge some of the presence, and one in particular, Mr. Kausikan, and we'd like to present you a tokens from MIS, and that is our medallion, which we celebrated our 50th year. So can we have the medallion on stage, please? And I would like to invite